Barack Obama's former NATO ambassador, Ivo Daalder, made a stunning admission before the British House of Lords this summer. He admitted that President Trump is systematically dismantling the post-war rules-based order that has guided Western policy for 8 decades. Monday's spectacle in the Oval Office, with European leaders sitting compliantly as Trump declared NATO membership for Ukraine off the table, provided vivid evidence of Daalder's assessment, and the sight of European leaders reduced to silent observers, while Trump made a private call to Putin, wasn't diplomatic theater. It was the visible collapse of an imperial system that has controlled global affairs since 1945. While the American people are still inundated with idiotic headlines about how Trump was flattered and played by the European leaders, the British press was more honest in its assessment. The pygmies of Europe still haven't realized how irrelevant they've become over Ukraine. But of course, that's not what you heard from the U.S. media, which takes every opportunity to declare Trump's efforts a failure or to claim that he has capitulated to Russia's demands. But White House Press Secretary Leavitt handled that very nicely yesterday.
All weekend following those historic U.S.-Russia bilateral talks, we listened to clueless pundits on television trying but failing to claim that the president had failed. The so-called experts in the foreign policy establishment, whose record is nothing but endless wars, trillions of wasted taxpayer dollars, and dead Americans, have the nerve to try and lecture President Trump, who has solved 7 global conflicts in 7 months, about peace.
I'm Susan Kokinda, and for decades, I've been exposing the role of British imperial subversion of our republic, from the halls of Congress to the political battlefields of Michigan. And Promethean Action was the first to highlight the role of the British House of Lords in the Russiagate conspiracy. And now we have new evidence that they are at it again. So stay tuned to this report and subscribe to Promethean Action as we follow this story. This week's update will look at 3 things. First, Trump is the peace president and he's calling the shots, not Europe or the British. Second, the British House of Lords are admitting that 80 years of policy just went down the tubes. And third, Trump's economic policies freak out the British free trade ideologues just as much as his foreign policy. In the Oval Office on Monday, Donald Trump made clear there is only one thing on the agenda: peace, and not the forever wars of the British and the Europeans. German Chancellor Merz's efforts to raise the need for a ceasefire rather than a peace agreement was shot down by Trump, who made the point that he had just settled 6 other wars without a ceasefire. After the meeting, key European attendees had to acknowledge Trump's historic role. Finnish President Alexander Stubb said, "I think in the past 2 weeks we've probably made more progress in ending this war than we've had in the past 3.5 years. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said, "Without President Trump, this deadlock with Putin would not have been broken. He is the only one who could do this." And Trump was able to do it because he rejected the imperial policies that precipitated the war. And he acknowledged the root causes of the war, namely NATO's constant expansion. And that's why NATO membership is off the table. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov recognized that the American position is decidedly not the European position in an interview yesterday.
It was clear that the US president and his team genuinely wanted to achieve results that would be long-term, stable, and reliable, unlike the Europeans, who at that time kept saying only ceasefire. And then, after that, they would continue supplying Ukraine with weapons. Secondly, Trump and his team clearly understood that this conflict has causes, and that the rhetoric of some European presidents and prime ministers, that Russia unprovokedly attacked Ukraine, is childish nonsense. I can't put it another way.
Now, as to the things that are on the table, they include the need for territorial concessions on both sides and security guarantees for Ukraine. The question of security guarantees is one of the thorniest because President Trump is well aware of 2 things: his own mandate to keep the U.S. out of forever wars, and second, Russia's insistence that there be no NATO troops in Ukraine. Yesterday, Trump made clear there would be no U.S. boots on the ground in Ukraine. And Secretary of State Rubio, in an interview with Jesse Waters, dropped the idea of non-European troops as security guarantors. But it was in that interview that Rubio also made the point that towers over whatever twists and turns the negotiations will take, and whatever sabotage attempts the globalists still have up their sleeves.
And by the way, President Trump is the only leader in the world, acknowledged by all the Europeans, the only leader in the world that can talk to both of them and bring them both to a meeting is Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States. He's the only one. And the fact that he's willing to do it is something that every American, including Democrats, should be happy that we have a peace president. We should be proud that we have a president that's made peace a priority in his administration.
Even if you understand how momentous these developments are in current history, you have to dig a little deeper to really appreciate the magnitude. Frankly, not enough of my fellow Americans or other patriots do, which is why we provide you with this background. And if you're ready to understand the deeper battle lines, join us at Promethean Action, where we've been tracking these imperial networks for decades. Subscribe to our free newsletter, or better yet, become a paying member to support our work. But if too few here understand what is going on, I can tell you that on the other side of the pond, there are plenty of folks who realize the stakes. The British elites do get it, and they're admitting that 80 years of their rules-based international order are over. In recent months, the British House of Lords has been holding hearings on the future relationship of the United States and the United Kingdom. And you can bet this is not just an academic exercise. Followers of Promethean Action know that in 2018, the British House of Lords did a similar study and issued an infamous report that said that the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom could not serve 2 terms of Donald Trump. British intelligence, with their American counterparts, made sure at that time that there was only 1 term. And how they carried that out is now the subject of the administration's full frontal counteroffensive against the Russiagate coup. That counteroffensive recently took 37 more scalps as Tulsi Gabbard removed the security clearance of another round of coup participants. In this summer's hearings, the Lords are now confronting the bitter reality that they ultimately failed to prevent Trump's second term. They are taking testimony from various American and British Atlanticists who seem to be a little more honest about their policies when they're speaking to the British House of Lords. Among the fellow travelers they took testimony from was Ivo Daalder, Obama's NATO ambassador, and now, guess where, at Harvard. On July 23rd, he outlined how the British, with their American partners, had constructed the post-war rules-based order, which had worked extraordinarily well over the past 80 years. Never mind that working extraordinarily well included 80 years of almost continuous perpetual warfare. Then he said, that order may remain, but the United States is no longer its guarantor. It is now being led by a president and an administration who believe that the order that the United States helped create and maintain, which has guided American and indeed Western policy for over 80 years, is an order that needs to disappear, that the United States needs to take primary responsibility for its own interests. And the best way to advance American interests is not to uphold this order, but to overturn it. Now, just as important as the foreign policy side of that rules-based order, which Trump is overturning, is the economic side, and Daalder acknowledged that as well. Quote, we are seeing it in its approach to the international global economy, and most destructively, we've seen it in its decision to abandon long-held American and indeed international views about multilateral institutions. Translated into plain English, the Trump administration is not playing by the rules of the global financier elite. It is instead reestablishing the principle of national economic sovereignty. The Alaska summit could open the door to a new era in U.S.-Russian economic relations based on that principle. Relations in space, nuclear power, and the Arctic. Accompanying the Russian delegation were representatives of Russian state energy and nuclear organizations, as well as Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian special envoy for foreign direct investment. This represents potential bilateral economic relations based on the mutual interests of both countries, not on the demands of a global financier elite. It's the return of the American system, where the power of government is used to foster production rather than letting financial parasites set the rules. That this is a new policy was not lost on the media mouthpieces for the British doctrine of unbridled free markets. Watch Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on CNBC completely flummox the interviewer, who goes nuts about the U.S. government being involved in industrial production.
As somebody who's been around the capital markets for years, as you have, then I do wonder, how do you view this idea of state capitalism that's being introduced?
Oh, it's a completely new way of approaching it.
Not that I expect a CNBC interviewer to understand this, but it's not state capitalism. It's called the American system, and for more than a century, that has been written out of our economic lexicon. You've been told that your two choices are the free market or socialism. Trump and his administration are now showing you how to use the power of government to build up our real economy. What we're witnessing is not just a change in policy, but a fundamental shift in the organizing principles of civilization itself. And the British elite know it. They admit that for 80 years, they've used institutions like NATO, the EU, and the central banking systems to shape global policy. Now Trump is systematically demolishing their playbook. He's demonstrating that peace comes through strength and direct negotiations, not endless imperial manipulations, and that when you respect sovereignty, you get results. He's proven that when you use government power to foster production rather than speculation, the economy grows. And the empire knows that their post-war game is up. Will they try and pivot and come up with a new strategy? Well, the House of Lords hearings show that they are, and Promethean action will be on the case. So subscribe to our newsletter or become a paying member and support our efforts. Because as long as you understand what Trump is doing, and you operate on the basis of reality and universal principles, they will fail. Let's make sure that they do. So stay focused and stay mobilized. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.